before then, but we'll sing it after the lesson.
Good morning, everyone. Please open your New Testaments to Mark chapter 12. And let me add my thanks to all of you for being here, those of you personally here in the auditorium, those of you who are streaming. We're so encouraged again by your decision to join us in our worship, to encourage us in our fellowship that we have in Christ. Just a quick question from last week for all of you. How are you doing with your plans? I don't need any response. I just want you to think about it. So this is the week of the month, the second Sunday of the month that we typically find ourselves studying the life of Christ as it's found in the Gospel of Mark. We are in the last week of Jesus' ministry. In the week that he's going to die. This is the chronology that I am following. You'll probably find just about as many anywhere you look. I believe that in John 12, he was Saturday night after the sun went down, after the Sabbath, that he went into Jerusalem and looked around. Sunday morning is the triumphal entry. Monday was the cleansing of the temple, and now today, Tuesday, where we are now in our study, there's a lot going on here. In fact, it's going to last until chapter 14. And last month, in December, Jesus entered into a time period here on Tuesday of debating the three main groups that make up the Sanhedrin, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the scribes. And the first group to approach him is the Pharisees, and they have the Herodians in tow. As they try to trap Jesus, they're trying to get him to answer a question that would label him as being an insurrectionist in the eyes of Rome, and thus they can convince Rome to put Jesus to death. And of course, as we showed, they failed miserably at that. So this month, we're looking at Mark, the 12th chapter, verses 18 through 27, in his discussion that he's going to have with the Sadducees. Lord willing, we'll look at his interaction with the scribes next month. We've entitled the lesson, Ignorance in High Places, and I'm not going to read the text here now. We'll go through it as I like to do, verse by verse, section by section, when we get to the textual part of our lesson. I want to begin this morning by giving you a little background on the Sadducees themselves. And then I also want to discuss the general view of the resurrection among the Jews at this time. I think that that's going to better prepare us to understand what's going on here between Jesus and the Sadducees. I know it meant a lot to me. I learned a lot in studying for this, and you know me, I like to share. I learned that in kindergarten. And so I want to share that information with you. So if you'll keep your Bibles open to Mark 12, we're going to go to some other texts. They'll all be up on the screen. If you want to write them down, taking notes, that'll be great. So let's talk about the Sadducees. They are one of the major sects of the Jews. We've already seen the Pharisees. The Pharisees are the most populous party. They're also the most popular party among the people of Israel. And we know enough about them. I'm not going to go into them very much. Then we talked about the Herodians. The Herodians have their faithfulness set securely in Rome and in the Herods. That's where their focus is. And then another sect that we don't read about in the New Testament, but is a pretty prolific sect during this time, is the Essenes. They're kind of a strange cross between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. They did believe in immortality. They did believe in divine punishment. They did deny the resurrection. And so they avoided, for the most part, deep interaction with the public and public life. A particular branch of the Essenes was responsible, the ones that lived out, away from the people, and who were celibate, for the Dead Sea Scrolls. that we have. But there was another branch that was not celibate. They married, they had children. The celibate group adopted children so they could continue to their party. But both sides of them were very structured, very hierarchical, and highly disciplined. The opposite of the Herodians is the Zealots, whose single purpose in life was to overthrow and kill anyone who supported Rome. So their focus was on Rome. Their focus was also on anybody that supported Rome, which would be people like the Sadducees and the Herodians. But today we're going to be looking at the Sadducees. I just wanted to give you that really quick rundown. That was free, no charge for that. So politically, the Sadducees were very eager to cooperate with Rome. They had a very cushy life because of Rome. Rome allowed them to run the temple and to do whatever they wanted with regard to the temple, and they were getting rich as a result of that with all of their taxes and the fees that they charged people for making their sacrifices. And while the Sadducees don't oppose putting Jesus to death, I think they just as soon not raise a fuss about it and raise Roman ire over doing something wrong. They would like, if it was possible, for people just to walk away from him. And you need to realize that Sadducees were not loved. In fact, they were hated by the populace, mostly because of their accommodation with Rome, but also because, as you've read about, I'm sure, the booths of Annas. If you're coming into town and you're going to make your sacrifice at the Passover, 9 times out of 10, your lamb isn't going to make it. But luckily, the high priest has some lambs over here he will be happy to sell you for a price. And by the way, your coin that's got an image on it, you can't use that in the temple, but we've got coins you can use at a slight increase, and you can use those. And of course, your lamb that was just condemned went around the corner and came back into his booth, and he sold it again to someone else. They were just cheats. They were robbing the people, and they were hated by the people because of that. Listen, when you're in the process of trying to sincerely worship God, and someone's got their hand out charging you for it, you're not going to make friends. As a side note here, because the party was so tied to Rome, the Sadducees, and because they were so tied to the temple, that when the temple was destroyed, they ceased to exist. When the temple was destroyed and the priesthood was lost, when their priestly power came to an end, because the temple was gone, so did they. And we don't read about them anymore after that. Religiously, the Sadducees kind of had a strange view of religion. They were liberal in the sense of our theology today. Liberal theologians today deny miracles and all of that kind of thing. And they were liberal in the sense that they denied the resurrection. They denied angels. They denied anything being alive in the spiritual realm. But on the other side, they were actually more strict legalists than the Pharisees were. Josephus said the Pharisees were lenient compared to the Sadducees. They are the hardline fundamentalists of the law of Moses. And oddly enough, they shared that idea with the Samaritans because they only accepted the first 5 books of the Old Testament, just the Pentateuch, what we would call the Torah. They rejected oral tradition, which is the mainstay of the Pharisees. They viewed themselves as the guardians of the pure faith of the Pentateuch. They interpreted the law more literally, and they were extremely fastidious about Levitical matters of purity. But again, they denied the resurrection. They denied any kind of future life, and consequently, they were annihilationists. They believed that when you died, you ceased to exist. They believed that body and soul perished at death. Very important that you remember that. Consequently, there's no rewards and there's no penalties in the afterlife because they didn't believe in an afterlife. So what is their goal? Obviously, they had no interest in the Messiah. They had no interest in salvation because they're annihilationists. So what's their goal with regard to Jesus? Why are they approaching Jesus here? They've just seen the Pharisees and the Herodians fall on their face trying to trap Jesus and failing in that. And the Sadducees are not trying to trap Jesus here. with their story as we're going to look at it. Their goal is one thing, and that's to make Jesus look stupid, to make him look foolish, to make him look ignorant and unlearned. And they're hoping by doing that to be able to discredit him in the eyes of the people and just make him go away, to get rid of him. Listen, they're very interested in getting rid of him because 2 times now he's devastated their operation in the temple. 3 years ago when he came in and cleansed it, and then just yesterday. So their ire is up about that. And they're the powerful ones. They're the wise ones. They're the wealthy. They're the aristocracy of Israel. They wield the power, and they think they can pull off what the low-life Pharisees were unable to do just before them. The religion of the people was Pharisee. The Sadducees had the power. The Sadducees had Rome. So that's kind of a little thumbnail sketch of them. So let's go back now and kind of pick up again in another sideline of this, and that's the notion of the resurrection among the Jews. The Jews corporately, in general, they believed in the resurrection. Most of them did. They had confidence in a future resurrection. In fact, they had a sense of resurrection in 2 dimensions. Resurrections they were looking forward to. The first one was a national resurrection. A national resurrection. And this comes from Ezekiel chapter 37, and you don't have to turn there if you don't want. I'm going to have the salient points up there in a moment. But this is the valley, the vision of the valley of dead bones. And in the first 4 verses, the hand of the Lord was upon Ezekiel, and he brought me in the spirit of the Lord and set me in the middle of a valley full of bones. He led me back and forth among them, and I saw a great many bones in the floor of the valley, bones that were very dry. These are not freshly dead people. Their bones are parched and dried. And the question is asked, Son of man, can these bones live? So in verses 4 through, I went too far. I'm going to read that. You look at the picture, I'll read the text. He answered the Lord, O Lord, you know alone. And he said to me, prophesy to these bones and say to them, dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says to these bones. I will make breath enter you, and you will come to me. I will attach tendons to you and make flesh come upon you and cover you with skin. I will put breath in you, and you will come to life. Then you will know that I am the Lord. So I prophesied as I was commanded. And as I was prophesying, there was a noise, a rattling sound, and the bones came together, bone to bone. And I looked, and tendons and flesh appeared on them, and skin covered them, and there was no breath in them. And then he said, prophesy to the breath. Prophesy, Son of man, and say to it, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Come from the 4 winds, O breath, and breathe into these slain, that they may live. So I prophesied as he commanded me, and breath entered them. They came to life and stood on their feet, a vast army. Then he said to me, Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. They say, our bones are dried up and our hope is gone. We are cut off. Therefore prophesy to them and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says, O my people. I'm going to open your graves and bring you up from them. I will bring you back to the land of Israel. And so there is this great vision of, in fact, I think I should have just gone to that. Let me keep reading there. Then people will know that I am bringing you, that I am the Lord, that I will open your graves and bring you up from them. So this is a picture of the resurrection of the nation of Israel. Ezekiel's in Babylonian captivity. Temple's been destroyed. Jerusalem's been destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. And it looks like they're without hope. They're gone. There's not any hope. They're like lifeless bones. And God said, I'm going to bring you back. I'm going to resurrect you and give you your nation. So just as in fulfillment to the promise of Abraham and the promise of David, and just as David kind of appears out of nowhere and rises up and defeats the Philistines and defeats Goliath and becomes a national hero, they believed the Messiah was going to come back and do that as well. But they also believed in a personal resurrection. The ancient writings, the non-biblical writings of the Jews of this period reflected that. 2 Maccabees talks about a resurrection. the apocalypse of Baruch, the apocalypse of Ezra, the apocalypse of Enoch, which are all apocalyptic writing, as you might guess, non-inspired writing, but all of them have stories in them and teachings in them about resurrection. In fact, if you took the time to read the Talmud, which I don't recommend you doing that, which is just a commentary on the Torah and debate about that, it speaks about the resurrection as well. So there was a general view of that. But the Old Testament shows this as well, and so buckle your seat belts because they're going to show you several passages in a row here. In Psalm 16, 9 through 11, therefore my heart is glad, and my tongue rejoices, my body also will rest secure, because you will not abandon me to the realm of the dead, nor will you let your faithful one see decay. You make known to me the path of life. You will fill me with joy in your presence, with eternal pleasures at your right hand. We recognize that as a messianic prophecy. It's about resurrection. I'm going to die and come forth. In Psalm 49:15, but God will redeem me from the realm of the dead. He will surely take me to himself. Job 19 and verse 26, after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. Isaiah chapter 26 and verse 19, but your dead will live, Lord. Their bodies will rise. Let those who dwell in the dust wake up and shout for joy. Your dew is like the dew of the morning. The earth will give birth to her dead. Daniel chapter 12 and verse 2, multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake. Some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt. And of course, Jesus taught that as well in John 5:21, among other places. For just as the Father raises the dead and gives them life, even so the Son gives life to those he is pleased to give it. Look down at the very end. Very truly I tell you, whoever hears my words and believes him who sent me has eternal life and will not be judged, but has crossed over from death to life. The Pharisees believed in resurrection, but listen, the Pharisees did with resurrection what they did with every other Bible topic that came across their desks, and that is, while they were definite about it and they accepted it completely, they argued about it, they debated about it, they dissected it and tried to come at it from every possible aspect, and they did that endlessly. And so they were talking about, well, we believe in resurrection, but when we're raised from the dead, then what? Well, so they debated, they debated whether they would be raised naked or with clothes. And they kind of came down on the side of clothed. And then they started debating, well, will you be raised with your burial clothes or will you get brand new clothes? Would a person be resurrected with the same infirmities and physical ills that put them in the grave in the first place? And for the most part, they said yes. The state you're in when you die is the state you're going to come back from. So if you go into the grave crippled, you're going to come back out a crippled. This is an interesting one. They believed all Jews would be raised in Israel. Now that's a feat. So how does a person who dies in Babylon wind up being raised from the dead in Israel? You didn't know this. I know I'm sharing this with you. It'd be brand new for you. They believed that there was an intricate system of tunnels under the earth, and if you died in Babylon, then your body would just roll all the way to Israel so that you would finally be raised there. I'm being serious. The Pharisees believed you were still married in heaven like you were on earth. You went in, you came out in the same way. Relationships, after all, were forever. They were permanent. Even to the point that some of them even believed that when you were raised, you would be having children again. So that's the gist, and that's the confusion of the Pharisaic understanding of the resurrection. And you may be asking, in light of all those passages that I just read, that clearly refer to the resurrection and to our resurrection, you may be wondering, well, why did the Pharisees not believe since it's so clearly taught in Scriptures? Do you recall where all of those passages that I read came to you from? They came from the Psalms and the prophets. And because they believed, the Sadducees, everything was subordinated to the Pentateuch, that there was no resurrection. They didn't believe in the writings. They didn't believe in any of those things. And they thought that resurrection was not found anywhere in the Torah, anywhere in the Pentateuch or the five books of Moses. And the Pharisees, of course, didn't just argue with themselves. They argued extensively with the Sadducees. They tried to find passages in the Pentateuch that would support Pharisee. They used passages like this one in Deuteronomy, 32 and verse 39. See now that I, even I, am he, and there is no God with me. I kill and I make alive. I wound and I heal. Neither is there any that can deliver out of my hand. And they would look at that and say, that's just figurative language. They never could find a passage that would convince the Sadducees. And it was a fiery debate among the Jews between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. This morning as I was going over my lesson, I remembered a passage and I'll just turn there, in Acts 23 and verses 6 through 9 when Paul is being judged in front of the Sanhedrin. It says, then Paul, knowing that some of them were Sadducees and others Pharisees, called out in the Sanhedrin, my brothers, I'm a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee, and I stand on trial because of my hope of the resurrection. When he said this, a dispute broke out between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. You see them grabbing each other by the neck. And the assembly was divided. The Sadducees say there is no resurrection, and that there are neither angels nor spirits, but the Pharisees acknowledged them both. And there was a great uproar. And some of the teachers of the law who were Pharisees stood up and argued vigorously. We find nothing wrong with this man. I mean, that's all you need. We need to find out that he's for the resurrection. He's innocent. And it was a big deal to them. When John and Peter were arrested in Acts the 4th chapter, as they were speaking to the people, the priests and the captain of the temple and the Sadducees came upon them, greatly annoyed because they were teaching the people and proclaiming Jesus, but they were teaching the resurrection from the dead. That's what put them in. They're annoyed at that. They hate it when people talk about the resurrection because they believed it was false doctrine. So with all of that background, you are well ready to enter Mark chapter 12. So in Mark chapter 12 and verse 18, it says, and the Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to him with a question. So Mark gives us some good information there. He tells us about the Sadducees. He tells us that what they believe, and that they came with this question that they want to talk to him about. Now, listen, I recognize that really how much interaction has Jesus had with the Sadducees up to this point in his life? And why is that? Well, I'll tell you why. Because all the Sadducees are in Jerusalem. They're not spread out all over the country like the Pharisees are. And so we constantly see Jesus talking with the Pharisees. Jesus is only going to interact with the Sadducees when he comes to their house. And he's in their house now. He saw them 3 years ago. They remember that little visit. And now he's here again. And yesterday he cleansed the temple. And so their ire is up. And this is the next day. It's the same day as the other things that we run. And we might add here that they know that Jesus believes in the resurrection. It's hard for me to believe that they didn't recognize that Jesus had raised Lazarus from the dead just a couple of weeks earlier. But I think that they're in denial of that. In fact, they're so much in denial they want to kill Lazarus. But they know that Jesus refers to himself as the resurrection and the life. That's a term that he uses. And again, they want to show him as being a foolish person. So verse 19. Teacher, they said, Moses wrote to us that if a man's brother dies and leaves a wife but no children, the man must marry the widow and have children for his brother. And so they begin with this word teacher. Listen, that is just feigned respect. There's no sincerity in that at all. And the text that they're talking about in the law of Moses is Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 5 and 6. If brothers are living together, so they're in close proximity to one another, and one of them dies without a son, his widow must not marry outside the family. Her husband's brother shall take her and marry her and fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to her. The first son she bears shall carry on the name of the dead brother so that his name will not be blotted out from Israel. And this is called the Levirate law. And it's the law of brothers, or the law of brothers-in-law if you're the widow. And so if the firstborn dies with no heir, then the next brother takes her place, marries her. The first son that she has through him is now called the brother's son, and the rest can be his. And in fact, the following passage in Deuteronomy 25 says what happens if you fail to fulfill your duty in the Levirate law. However, if a man does not want to marry his brother's wife, she shall go to the elders at the town and say, my husband's brother refused to carry on his brother's name in Israel. He will not fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to me. Then the elders of his town shall summon him and talk to him. Can you see that? Please, you got to marry her. And if he persists in saying, I do not want to marry her, his brother's widow shall go up to him in the presence of the elders, take off one of his sandals, spit in his face, and say, this is what is done to the man who will not build up his brother's family line. Listen, you don't want that sign on the front door of your house, that you're that kind of person. So listen, the Levirate law was not a part necessarily of the law of Moses. It's a cultural, fundamental custom of these people. You see it, first of all, in Genesis, the 38th chapter, with Judah, whose eldest son was married to Tamar. He was a wicked person from the get-go, and God killed him. And so Judah gave his second son, Onan, to Tamar as a husband. Onan didn't want to do that and failed to do as he should. You can read about that if you want. And because he refused, God killed him. And so Judah refused to give Tamar his third son, Shelah, and you can read. That's an interesting story. You're also going to see the Levirate law at work in the book of Ruth, with Ruth and Boaz. So that's the portion of the law that they're referring to. Verses 20 through 23. Let's take a bigger chunk here. Now there were 7 brothers. The first one married and died without leaving any children. The second one married the widow, but he also died, leaving no child. It was the same with the third, and in fact, none of the 7 left any children. Last of all, the woman died too. Listen, every man in Israel sighed with relief when that happened. At the resurrection, their question is, whose wife will she be, since the 7 were married to her? So the woman died, and we have this really absurd, hypothetical situation that the Sadducees have given. Listen, now, knowing the foolish debating of the Pharisees, no doubt their bungling of the scriptures and attempting to prove the resurrection, and their belief that when you were raised with your good points or bad points, and your relationships all intact, all your situations were there when you died. Knowing that, I can understand why the Sadducees came up and concocted this scenario to try to defeat the Pharisees in their argument. The reason why the Pharisees couldn't answer it is because the Pharisees had made an absurdity out of the resurrection. And listen, this argument here, which shows that, and they understood, a man could have many wives. Wasn't true the other way around. A wife couldn't have many husbands. There was polygamy, but there wasn't polyandry. And this was the Sadducees' premier argument. There wasn't a Pharisee alive on the earth that could answer it. They trotted it out every time they got into this debate. And listen, they are sure that Jesus can't answer it too, and that he's going to be made to look like a fool. So we have Jesus' response starting in verse 24. At the resurrection, or they said, at the resurrection, whose wife shall she be? Verse 24, Jesus replied, are you not in error because you do not know the scriptures or the power of God? So Jesus is going to give them a judicious solution to their absurd hypothetical, and he's going to give them a scriptural answer. He's going to give them the truth about it. And he says, you're in error because you don't know the scriptures, and implied, you also do not know the power of God. Matthew's version of this said, Jesus replied, you are mistaken because you do not know the scriptures or the power of God. Jesus is saying, you're the ones in error. You're the ones that have the problem. I'm not the one that has the problem here. Your problem is your ignorance of Scripture and your ignorance of the power of God. So the problem is not with me, it's with you. They're trying in this process to show the people that he is an ignorant fool, and what he's going to do is turn the tables on them and show them to be the ignorant ones. By the way, the word mistaken there in Matthew's account, you are mistaken, is from the Greek word planao, P-L-A-N-A-O, from which you and I get our word planet. And a planet is a planet because it wanders in the sky. As you're viewing Venus and Mars and Mercury or whatever you can see, as they were looking at it, they moved around in the world. And the verb actually means to wander or to lead astray. And so Jesus is saying, you're cut free from reality. You're not anchored anywhere. You're wandering around trying to find the truth. Which, by the way, and this is free, in Jude the 13th verse, when he talks about the false prophets being wandering stars, that's exactly what he's talking about. People that have no basis in truth. He said, first of all, you don't know the scriptures. You do not know the scripture. The word not in the Greek is meh, M-E, and it's not just not. It denies subjectivity. It not only talks about and implies a negative ignorance, but the other side of it, a positive unwillingness to find out. They wanted to stay in their ignorance. They did not care to understand the scriptures. There was no interest in doing that. They prided themselves on their literal understanding, and Jesus said, you are failing fools in that. But you also don't know the power of God. Listen, the power of God is on full display in Genesis chapter 1 and 2 of their book, of the one that they hold on to. And if God can create all that exists in 6 days out of nothing, then why would he be stymied by your misunderstanding of how the resurrection can work? They did not know the power of God. Verse 25. When the dead rise, they will neither marry nor be given in marriage. They will be like the angels in heaven. And so here's the explanation that Jesus gives. And I love the first thing that he says, when the dead are raised. He just states it as a fact. When the dead are raised, they will neither marry nor be given in marriage. Luke's account of this says that the sons of this age marry and are given in marriage. The word sons of this age mean the people that are living now. You and I are the sons of this age. We're alive. And in this life, we marry and are given in marriage. But then we won't. Then we will be, he says, like the angels. Not angels, but like the angels. And we're going to be like the angels in a number of senses. Number one, no marriage. There's no marriage because there's no need for it. Why did God give marriage to us? He gave it for companionship. It's not good for man to be alone. He gave it for reproductive and filling the earth, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth, among other reasons that we could name. But in the next life, there's no need for that. There's not going to be any dying. So there's not any need to replace ourselves. And there's not going to be any loneliness. We're all going to be complete and full in ourselves, in our spiritual body. So there's no marriage because there's no purpose for marriage in the next life. Don't you just love the fact that Jesus threw angels in here? When the Sadducees don't believe in angels, he just put it in. While I'm talking about resurrection, let's talk about angels too. I love that. Verse 26. Now about the dead rising. Have you not read in the book of Moses, in the account of the bush, how God said to him, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And so Matthew here in 22:31 says about the resurrection, have you not read what God says to you? Listen, they were supposed to be experts in the law. They were supposed to be the experts in the Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy part of God's word, which is all that they believed in. And you're stuck there? And you can't find it there? Have you not read the law of Moses? Listen, Jesus is being just a little sarcastic here. And sarcasm is a way of conveying contempt and commenting on people's failure. But most of all, sarcasm is the use of irony to make a point. They're saying we're experts. He's saying, no, you're not. And pointing that out, saying, have you never read this book? Have you never read the Pentateuch? And so he gives for them the account of Moses meeting God at the burning bush, and as God is identifying who he is. This is a very identification of God. He said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He said, I am the God of these. He didn't say, I was the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I am. It's an identification that is in the present tense. Listen, by Exodus 3, all of those guys, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, were long dead. In fact, in the books of Moses, God is going to call himself the God of Abraham 2 times in the book of Genesis after Abraham has died. He's going to repeat that 3 times in Exodus 3, that I'm the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And then he's going to say it again in Exodus 4, I'm the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And he's saying he's not a God worshipped by corpses. Verse 27, his concluding statement, he is not the God of the dead, but of the living. You are badly mistaken. God is the God of the living, not of the dead. And then I love that he adds this. In the NIV it says, you are badly mistaken. In the English Standard Version it says, you are quite wrong. And in the New American Standard Bible it says, you are greatly mistaken. Here in the most obvious place in the writings of Moses where God describes who he is the evidence of an afterlife and consequently of resurrection. And Jesus is using their own scriptures. Listen, Pharisees weren't very bright either because they never came up with this one either. The only ones they claim to follow, we've talked a lot about in evangelism, you've got to start where people are. Jesus did here. He started where they were. They were stuck in the Pentateuch, and so he used their book, their scripture, to prove to them that there is an afterlife. Ignorance has no boundaries. It doesn't matter how powerful you are, or how weak you are, how rich you are, or poor you are. Ignorance affects every one of us. Fortunately, ignorance is easily cured. We can all be taught. And if a person's heart is honest and good, they'll accept it. As you read there in your text in verse 27, you are badly mistaken. Do you ever hear anything else from the Sadducees here? Or we do have immediately a scribe getting up and talking. They just kind of disappear. They kind of faded into the crowd, just like the Pharisees and the Herodians did before. So let's bring our lesson to a conclusion. And listen, the bottom line for us is there will be a resurrection. The song that John sang prior to and after the Lord's Supper shouts that he is alive and he's coming to get us. And there, for some, it's going to be a resurrection unto life. And sadly, for the most part and the majority, it's going to be a resurrection unto death. But this life is not the end for anybody. I just thought I'd add this because, people say, well, what is it going to be like? Well, we don't know what our bodies are going to be like. 1 John in chapter 3 and verse 2, dear friends, now we are children of God, and what we will be has not yet been made known. But we know that when Christ appears, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. And Paul echoed that in Philippians, the 3rd chapter, in verse 21, speaking of Jesus, who by the power that enables him to bring everything under his control will transform our lowly bodies so that they will be like his glorious body. So I know that. I know we're going to be like him. I don't know anything else. Listen, you don't want to be raised to eternal separation from God. You're going to be raised. You don't want to be raised to separation from God and eternal death. And Jesus died, that we just memorialized. He died to give you the option, listen to this, the option to choose life. To choose to be raised like him and to live with him in eternity. And listen, if you're of a mind that you want to know a little bit more about that before you commit, good on you. I'm glad. Let us share with you what we know about Jesus and what he's done for us. And the salvation that he offers to us that's based on a faithful obedience to the conditions of his grace. The song that John selected for us is Come to Jesus. Come today. If you're not a child of God this morning, please listen to us as we encourage you to come to Jesus today in this song. And if you're a child of God and you haven't been walking in a way that's going to bring God glory and him glory, please let us help you with that as well. If we can help you in any way, please come forward while we stand and sing.